to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to Talent Optimization. Today we are chatting about what is a coaching culture and what does coaching look like. And I have with me a very dear friend, a fellow predictive index consultant, at least we went through a training together, a fellow certified coach through ICF. And so welcome Donna Star to the show. And what I so love about Donna is how she takes her 30 years of experience in corporate, weaves it into what happens day to day to really elevate individuals and organizations in a way that everyone succeeds. Donna, welcome.
I'm so happy to be here. And you're one of my favorite people that I've met on my coaching journey because we met, 3 years ago?
Yep. We met at launch through Predictive Index, both trying to figure out what are we doing? And then COVID hit. And then we really said, what are we doing?
We met in a breakout room.
We did.
Oh my God. Should that be the title of a book? We met in a breakout room.
Yes.
Talk about the COVID culture. We met in a breakout room.
We met in a breakout room, but we didn't break up. We got together to have a really great friendship.
I know. It's been great. It's been great.
And so one of the things I love about you, Donna, is I will just send you a text and be like, what do you think about this? Or, hey, this crazy thing just happened. And you'll do the same. And it's something that I absolutely love because we've created something that is both positive, a place and a space to be who we are, but also to elevate each other. And so you coach on this all the time with individuals inside of organizations. But this thing about a coaching culture, it doesn't happen overnight and it's very intentional. So what is a coaching culture?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I really like the way that you and I communicate, right? Because that to me is the basis of a coaching culture. So when I think
about how do we communicate, Donna?
No, it's open, it's honest, it's authentic. Yeah. I don't feel like I have to be a certain way for you, and you don't feel like you can just be yourself. People always talk about psychological safety as the main way that employees are their most productive and safe. And that makes sense to me. But I also think psychological safety is a buzzword that people are like, I might throw that out. I don't even know what that means. I mean, of course, people know what it means, but it just feels a little lofty to me. And so sorry for all the people that might be listening and may disagree with me, but I worked in corporate for 30 years. And I believe a coaching culture is one that is willing to take a hard look at themselves and realize that what they do as a business doesn't necessarily always support their employees and their personal growth. That professional growth and personal growth, when done correctly together, you get the best outcome. And I think professional development, let me know if I'm going on too long, but professional development, making you better in your job, but not making you better as a human, is never going to have the best possible outcome.
It is the same pot of soup, right?
Right.
It really is, because who you bring to work is the same who that you bring home, and that beingness, right? Like, how we are being in every situation has a huge impact. And actually, before you and I kind of got on, we just had a quick chat about both of us kind of feeling like at a very, very short fuse because of a number of different things that are going on, both personally and professionally, right? And when there's no fuse left, it's really easy to kind of go off on something that you wouldn't normally do. And there's a number of different strains that are happening in all of our lives right now. And if there's a tremendous amount of stress at work, and it doesn't have to be negative stress, right? Like, stress is not necessarily a negative thing when it's used in the right way.
Just to pull.
Yeah. But when you have too much of it and that goes home with you, it has negative effects there, and vice versa.
And right now, people's work is home. So when we think about all the women that have left the workforce, all the people that have left the workforce, the reason I think we're talking about coaching cultures and we're having more intense conversations about what employers need to do differently is because that business as usual is no longer business as usual, because business on its face value has changed. Remote, hybrid, whatever, work from home. How do you create teams and collegiality when you're on Zoom? So a coaching culture is just as important as just a company culture. You can't have a coaching culture if it fights with a company culture. It has to be embedded into the culture.
Absolutely.
And that has to be, a manufacturing environments, and I've never thought about this till this moment, is just in time, manufacturing or quality, whatever you want to say. That's the same with coaching cultures. In the moment, how are we supporting our employees? No blame game, lack of judgment.
Yeah.
It's so hard to do when you're stressed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's so interesting is I just spent the last 3 days doing an on-site with an amazing client of mine. And we went through, if you're familiar with Predictive Index, the Drive Results with Talent, which is a 2-day course, and really this personal and professional development training of understanding yourself. And P.S., if you're interested in what is your profile, it's in the show notes. You can go ahead and get it there and we can have another conversation about it because it's fun. But with that, so we had this entire 3-day training of who are they as a team? Who are they as an individual? And this is a startup organization that is just launching a manufacturing environment. And so much of what came out of that is HR is so refreshing here than what we've seen previously in our other organizations, because you truly care about the people, that we're in the right seat and that we're getting the business results. And that was something where, we're not talking about coaching culture there, but we just embedded it. Same as what you talked about earlier with psychological safety, right? It's like, there's all these things we're talking about now that we never had to talk about 20 years ago because it was just there. And now it's like, oh, geez, we have this coaching culture and we have this psychological safety and I get a gold star for it. It's like, well, why isn't it there? Like, why is this even a question?
I mean, we ask that a lot, right? I mean, I have so much to say about this topic. And I want to start with staffing, like just in my world of staffing. Most of my background was at recruitment advertising software. And so I was always working with companies on hiring strategies. Yeah. And I think the whole idea of stack ranking and just the way we look at employees as A players, B players, C players, I think we have to reevaluate that if we brought on an employee, that there is some responsibility to the company to ensure success, at least in the first 6 to 12 months, right? And maybe during COVID, even a little bit longer since the connection isn't there.
Right.
And then I think we look at retaining employees, onboarding employees. There are touch points at every single phase of a candidate's life that we need to be eyes on, not just when they're leaving, not just when they're coming, but like I think a coaching culture needs to look at every point of intersection of a candidate and an employee.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the tension points, we spend too much time on the wrong tension points.
Right. And guess what? We will find what we're looking for. If we're looking for those positive things, we're going to find it. When we're looking for those negative things, we're going to find it. Right. And I think that goes into, as you create a coaching culture, so much of it comes down to, are you creating the space for the individual, to really be successful? But some of that comes down to the questions that you ask. So, I know you can't see this because we're on a podcast, but I have a plate that sits on a desk behind me that says, I wonder what's on their plate that I don't yet know about. And that's really looking at, that curiosity to say, you know what, if something's not going right, there's probably a reason for it. And am I curious enough to get to know that and slow down enough to figure that out so that I can really support them to be their best?
Yeah, I love that question. I think a coaching culture is also, I want to slow it down and just talk about the difference between mentoring and coaching a little bit. A lot of companies think they have a coaching culture, if this is okay, just to bring up, because they find mentors. Yeah.
And what's interesting, so for our podcast listeners, you will know that the whole month of January, we focused on mentoring. And I actually did a mentoring podcast on, high potential mentoring programs and our thoughts on that and what that potentially means when we put people into boxes. And that one actually dropped on January 20th. And then we actually brought on an employment law attorney about the mentoring programs and what that looks like. And that one dropped on January 27th. So I would love to hear your take on that distinction between coaching and mentoring. So for those of you that have been listening, or if you haven't, if you want to go back, this is such a fun touch point because we've been weaving this needle all throughout 2022.
Because I do hear people say, using the term, alternating between the terms. And in fact, when I went to my coaching program, and I know you did too, I was like, oh, I've been coaching people for 30 years. No, I wasn't. In fact, I was mentoring them.
Yeah,
I was supporting them, but I was not, in fact, coaching them. So mentoring is, correct. I have more expertise in a certain topic, or I'm a company expert and you are assigned to me and I'm going to help you navigate the world of work or your position or your future developments. So just to make it real, coaching is I'm invested in you outside of your professional development, and that may be part of it, and your personal development. I am coaching what is going on with you at the moment. Now we can set up goals, but that is not mentoring, because in mentoring, I have the answers as the mentor. In coaching, the person I'm coaching has the answers. My job is to help facilitate. So to get back to your amazing question, a great coach asks the right questions. A great coaching culture asks the right questions. They don't give the answers.
Correct. They don't give the answers, but they also do not embed negativity into the question. So let me give you an example.
Yes.
Hey, Donna, how are you holding up today?
Yeah. That has an implicit, like something's wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Versus, hey, Donna, how are things going?
Right. Yeah. Hey, why don't we just riff? What I think people are really looking at from their managers and their leadership and their coworkers is caring. Mm-hmm. I am more than just the person behind the screen. So I agree that the questions you ask, you have to be really careful. And in coaching, we call those open-ended questions, right? Mm-hmm. And we also have to watch out for our tone and make sure that we're not leading.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So you're right. Questions are the heart of coaching. Curiosity actually is the heart of coaching.
Yeah. And in a way, we've just tiptoed into how to implement a coaching culture, right? So how do you implement that? And I know you work with individuals on this, on a daily basis.
I do. And, I also work for coaching companies. And so some companies they believe in a coaching culture. They bring coaches in for their execs. They bring coaches in for high potential people, and so that to me is a coaching culture that believes in embedding coaches into the environment. Mm-hmm. But short of a company making that sort of investment to bring in coaches at every stage, because that is costly, is train your managers to ask empowering questions like the questions that you asked. It doesn't mean you have to bring in a coach to have a coaching culture. It means that you have to have a transparent, open culture where you're asking your employees open-ended, curious questions, and that there's no backlash for that. People talk about bringing their whole self to work. Is that really true? Can they really bring their whole self to work? Can they tell you that, their 2-year-old has COVID and there's some, where is your line of empathy? Because really a good coaching culture is empathetic.
Right. And, there's some circumstances where it's like, it doesn't matter when you do your work. And what we also know is if there's something going on at home, you are not really going to be able to be focused at work. And, one of the podcasts that we've had is Jason Lawrenson on the show. And I don't remember what number that was, but we'll link to it in the show notes. But one of the key things we talked about there is if there really is something going on at home, going through divorce, there's whatever happening at home, COVID or whatever, right? There's nothing to optimize about that person because their tank is empty,
Yeah.
And you can really find that through that coaching culture and create some different opportunities of how do we support? Because sometimes it is that psychological and that mental support to say, look, go take the afternoon, go do whatever those meetings are that you need to do so that the mind is off of that. Sometimes it's, hey, here's 3 resources to call so that they don't have to go ahead and add that onto the list of the 772 things that are already there.
Yeah. So I have one just real live example. My daughter happens to work in an amazing company, and she, you and I talked about some of our difficulties personally that we were having, why our tanks are a little bit empty. My daughter flew home, and she works for literally an amazing company. Their name is called Purpose. So they're a social impact agency.
Yeah.
And they live their mission, and you can tell that. So she had found out both of her grandparents had cancer the same day. She's very close to them. And she has to have her wisdom teeth out, and she doesn't live here, and she was in pain. So she just was triple whammied. Right. And she just could not function, to your point, about work. And so her boss, they finally did a catch up on Friday. And she's, sometimes, Hannah, there are just days when your personal life just has to trump your actual work. And we believe in that fully. And just take the time off. Yeah. Just take the time you need. And then yesterday they sent her flowers. Now I know companies send flowers, but they wrote her the most beautiful, heartfelt note. And, the company with the name Purpose, social impact, they live their values. So I would challenge any company that's listening. Some people just say, oh yeah, we do that.
Right.
Do you really do that? Like, ask yourself some of the tough questions.
Right. Do you really do that?
Do you really do that? Because in order to have a coaching culture, you just have to be real with yourself.
Right.
You have to be real with how you implement your policies and your strategies.
Yeah. One of the participants in my workshop yesterday, she goes, and I'm not mentioning their name just because I don't.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I should. But.
Yeah, no, I just don't have their permission yet, but they will be on the podcast at some point in time. But one of the participants, Gabby, said yesterday, she goes, here's what we need to ensure we have the best culture here at XYZ company. And it is that we have to have empathy, and we just have to be nice to each other. If we do that, everything else is going to fall in line.
Well, the rest takes care of itself. Sometimes I think we overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
This is not implementing software that everybody has to be trained on. This is a total trickle down, trickle across effect. But kindness matters. I talk about it in almost all my coaching sessions.
Yeah.
Fight fire with kindness.
Yeah, for sure.
When I went to my coach training program and I found out I'm a core energy coach. So we talk about levels of energy. Level 2 is very common in corporate America, which is I win, you lose. It's like us against them. And I felt that, between departments, creative doesn't always get along with account service. But I never looked at I may have, but when I heard that language, I was like, okay, there are always these dynamics. Do we ever look at them and say, how do we look at this situation differently? And I think that is the heart of a coaching culture, is that you're willing to look at things differently. You're not looking at the status quo. I don't know if you agree with that, but that feels real.
Yeah, and I do agree with that, because there's a number of different ways to look at things. And at the end of the day, it's like there's 2 key things that matter. And that is, did we follow through to do what we said we were going to do? Yeah. And have we left both ourselves and the individuals we came in contact with whole and complete?
Once you put it out there that simply, no, I mean, if companies have scorecards, and a lot do, if you just measure yourself on those 2 pieces, you'll know whether you have a coaching culture.
Right. Because all through corporate culture, for me, one of the lines that I heard over and over and over again is so-and-so is leaving people in their wake. So-and-so is leaving people in their wake. Like, that means you're not leaving people whole and complete, right? That is not a coaching culture.
Yeah. One of my things when I worked in corporate was when people left, and I know it would be harder to do now, not really, is let them leave with as much kindness as possible. This whole idea of walking employees out, I get that, right? With competitive nature, right? I get some companies do that. But if they are going to stay, make them feel welcome. Make them feel like you support their decision to leave the company, and leave the door open. Boomerang employees, I happen to believe fully in boomerang employees.
It's huge. And it's like, how do we create happy alumni? In the conversation I was having with this company, as we're sitting around the table and chatting, and there's, I don't know how many of us there were, 12, 13. And I said, what is the highlight of your career? And the CEO looks at me and said, the highlight of my career is that I can run across individuals that I mentored 40 years ago and see them running multi-million, if not billion-dollar companies, and know that I mentored them up. And, more than half the people around the room were individuals that he's worked with 2 or 3 times over the course of his career. And that was the same for just about every single director around that table. And that idea of creating happy alumni in the organization, and what are those core values that are the personal core values that truly align with the organizational core values, and predictive index, we call that, where's the heart? Do we have alignment between the individual and the organizational core values, where we have a heart match, right?
Yeah. And we talk a lot about coaching alignment all the time, right? Your culture, are you hiring people that match your values? Or actually, what I say to my clients who are generally trying to decide where they want to do next, you get to choose where you work next.
Yeah. And it is always a choice.
It is always a choice, but some people don't look at it that way. You have a choice to stay at your company. By the way, notwithstanding that people have financial hardship out there, I don't want to sound very privileged here, but there are always choices in the decision that we make. So I don't want to sound privileged, but I do think that there's a lot more choice than people realize out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how do you measure the coaching culture?
Well, I think it would be difficult right now to measure it based on retention, right? Because we're in the middle of the Great Resignation, hopefully towards the end, but I don't know where we are exactly in this Great Resignation. But I do think retention in general is a good barometer. Performance improvement. So what I do with my clients and my corporate clients is we set out goals in advance. So much like a client has or a company might have a scorecard, let's have a scorecard for our coaching culture. What are we measuring ourselves on? And if retention is one of them, or improved production, or happier clients with pulse surveys, do we feel an increase in being in a supportive environment? That's a great way to measure response. And I think pulse surveys are so easy to do. Just a one question, 1 or 2 questions every quarter, every month, however else you want to do it. But you will feel the more positive energy in a coaching culture. You will feel less tension. And people don't understand coaching until they actually experience it. I don't know how you feel about that, but a lot of my clients that I coach, they're like, I didn't really understand what coaching was.
And it's interesting because the podcast that will drop next week after this one drops really, or maybe it was the one before, I don't know. But one of them really talks about the importance of experiencing that coaching culture and what that really means.
Right. And so that's why I think if you put some benchmarks out there, because we are companies and we do want some benchmarking, I think you can very easily assess what a coaching culture success is, because you're generally going to have happier, more supported employees who feel that they are able to use their voice. I find a lot of employees, and I just was on the phone with one earlier today, a client who really didn't feel comfortable speaking up. Now, that's much more about the way that person shows up, and there's some work for us to do there. But if you see an employee who generally is not very vocal and you see them starting to speak up more, you'll see a difference. So it will manifest in many different ways.
Right. And if you use people data tools, so for example, predictive index is a great people data tool, and there's 2 key tools within that. And one is there's in the behavioral assessment, there's the self, which is who you are, and the self concept, which is essentially how have I been stretched and pulled to behave based on my environment in the last 30, 60, 90 days. And there's a drive that's really the communication drive. So for those of you familiar with PI, it's the B drive, but this communication drive, that if it is naturally high and that communication drive all of a sudden goes down significantly, guess what? That means there's probably an environment where that individual feels like they can no longer talk and name things that are important, meaning they're not contributing. And that was some of the biggest ahas in, the seminar that I did this week, is when those very active vocal communicators stop talking, you've got big problems in your organization. And the other way that we look at that is through our climate surveys. I'm getting ready to send out another one to an almost 1,000-person employer today. And, those climate surveys, we can look at them over time. Like we've been doing this for this organization. We're going on our 4th year. And every semester we do this, and we can really see where the trends are, where are the trends with managers, where are the trends, in the different locations. And so those are some really good ways to see how are we doing? And not just in coaching culture, but in a number of different areas.
Yeah, in a number. I love that because the self-concept is probably, I really like that idea because I know, like, I saw my self-concept stretched and now I know it's much more condensed because I'm much more aligned now. So I love that idea. Regardless of those surveys, which I think are amazing, there is some amount of training that I think would have to go on with managers. Just to, what do you think about? Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this doesn't just happen. I mean, there has to be some discussion and some
Unfortunately,
training.
There's no magic wand. Poof, it's done overnight.
There's no magic wand. We know from our corporate lives, Tracy, that it can be done.
Absolutely. And it can be done incredibly, incredibly effectively. So Donna, I'm super curious. What is one key takeaway from our conversation today about a coaching culture that you think is important for our executives and CEOs listening in?
I think a key takeaway for me is, do you understand what a coaching culture is? And are you asking yourselves the right questions? And how committed are you to making this happen for your company?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what's a takeaway for our human resources practitioners and listeners?
I think that HR people are stretched more than they ever have been before. So I want to acknowledge that we are living in unprecedented times. So I would like to say that I support HR more than I ever have, especially if you're a generalist and you're asked to do more. That this doesn't rest on HR's shoulders. This rests on the whole company's shoulders. Mm-hmm. So that is one thing. Maybe that's not what you expected, but I think that...
Yeah, I think that's great. And you actually just did something that I think is really important in a coaching culture, and that is showing gratitude.
Yeah, gratitude is... I do character strengths with a lot of my clients. It's, it's just a fun thing to do. And the data behind character strengths, and it's free on the VIA Strength Finder, is, and you might want to put that in the notes, even though it's not PI, so it doesn't, just a fun thing on your personalities. High level of gratitude has almost the highest benefit to any of the other personality traits. So I'm glad you brought that up. Back to HR. I think HR's role at the table is to call things out that they believe, that is HR's role, is the professional and personal development of the workforce. So while it isn't their responsibility to execute and implement and be responsible for every facet, it is, I feel, partially they're responsible to bring up when they see the gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Donna, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And we will link the VIA Strength Finders because that is an amazing, it's not VIA Strength Finders. I said that wrong. So
no, it is. It's VIA Strength Finder and the free survey. Okay. There's a free survey right on the homepage.
Yep,
and
that's
Tracy, I just want to thank you and tell you that I have known you for 3 years now, and I admire you. You inspire me, and your continuous learning and your wanting to always move the ball forward always inspires me, and how fair and authentic you are. So I appreciate you and what you do for so many.
Oh, thank you so much, Donna. And we will also have Donna's information in the show notes if you want to follow her, join her coaching programs, because they're phenomenal. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. Come back next week because we're talking all month about coaching, and we'll see you then. Have a great one.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.